Yeah, that was the crazy thing about it. I was like, when he wanted me to do it,
Yeah,
I
sorry.
was sort of like, well, why me? What are you talking about? And he said, well, because your aesthetic is about trying to make something real, and that would be crazy in a
Right.
giant monster movie. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
all right, that I could get into. And so that to me was the fun of that movie, was trying to find some way to ground something that was so absurd in a texture that felt
Right.
real and do something about anxiety.
Right. Every Hollywood redo of a European hit, pretty dependably, year after year, decade after decade,
Yes.
fucks it up in some way or another,
Uh-huh.
dilutes it, overdoes it, cheapens it on some level. It doesn't. They just miss the thing, you know.
Right.
This, not universally, but many people I've spoken to, holds to the things that were very solid and good and true
Oh,
about
that's great.
about the Swedish version, the original,
Right.
and significantly, in some ways, improves upon it. It makes it
Oh.
a slightly better
That's
film.
that's very kind. I'm glad that some people feel that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that I felt was, Lindquist did the screenplay adaptation of his novel, and there's been some talk even about, oh well, some people love it, some people are saying, oh, we like it, but there's a lot of it that's too shot for shot. But the truth is, the movie is not shot for shot. I actually asked my director of photography, Greg Fraser, who's amazing, who I loved working with. He shot Bright Star. He's a very talented guy. I loved working with him, and he had never seen the movie, and the actors had never seen the movie, and I asked them not to. And
Really?
Yeah, they did not. They had not watched the movie. They've watched it now, and then they loved the movie, but they hadn't seen it then. And I really felt it was important for us to try and make this as if it was ours. And so there was no like, let's reference this or let's reference that. The thing that is very similar is that a lot of the stuff that's the same in both movies is verbatim from the book. And the genius job, I think, that Lindquist did in his own adaptation is one of editing. Because the book could be like a 10-hour Stephen King-like miniseries. It's a huge horror book, and it changes point of view. And I very much I so connected to the coming-of-age story that I really wanted to focus even slightly more so on that, and take even the characters that are in the Swedish film, who are sort of the neighbors and they hang out in the Chinese restaurant. They have huge sections in the book that are not at all in the first film, but you really follow their lives and their point of view. And I wanted to keep it exclusively in Owen's point of view, Oscar from the book and the first film, and use those stories to illuminate their story, the coming-of-age story. And so the neighbors then started to function as, there was this kind of opportunity to do kind of a Rear Window-esque thing where, because in the book they all live in the same apartment complex, he's able to look out into the world of adults and see the neighbors and see this woman, Virginia, who is sort of this glimpse into sexuality and into adulthood and to the parents. His parents obviously had fought terribly before they broke up, and he sees these sort of adults and this woman who's very attractive, and they fight, and all of that sort of gets into what it feels like to be at that age where you're very confused by all of that, probably frightened by it, overwhelmed, but also find it kind of alluring.
Right.
And so I wanted to use the subplots to sort of give you more of what it would feel like to be that kid, and I tried to make it as point of view driven from his point of view as possible. And the same thing, I tried to draw an element from the police story, which actually also is in the book, but use that as a, I really responded to the kind of tragic Romeo and Juliet part of the story, and I thought that in a way, the Elias Koteas character could focus as two things. On the one hand, he looks from the outside at all these horrible things that are happening and says, well, what could possibly cause this? And of course, the movie reveals all of that, and we know it, and he's getting closer and closer. But on the other hand, he is fate, coming closer and closer to the end of their relationship, what will force her to leave. And so that was, all of those things were all set in my mind. The changes that we did make narratively were about trying to just heighten and focus it in even more exclusively on Owen's story.
I was struck by what I feel is a fairly strong similarity in, I won't describe it too specifically for those who haven't seen either version, but the swimming pool scene at the end.
Yes.
Now, wasn't that very similar?
That's very similar. That's very similar for a point of view.
In a very good way, I should
yes,
say.
And that scene, I have to say that scene in the original film is astonishingly great. It's wonderful. And actually that point of view is described in the book. You do in the book you do live through that point of view in that scene in quite a haunting way. There were parts of it where this kid actually hears somebody calling to be let in, and so some of it above the ground you actually see, and we see a little bit above the ground in this version too. It does cross-cut a little bit, but it is largely like the original in that point of view. And my idea was to take as much of the film and keep it in that point of view as possible, which is see what Owen sees for the most part. Try to keep it restricted like that. But that was one of the brilliant sort of suspense things that the original did, which I loved, and which is definitely something that I was inspired by for sure.
And the way you can hear sound but not very clearly
quite.
Through water,
Absolutely.
that was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, the Skywalker guys, they did Cloverfield with me, and I love them, and they did a beautiful job.
So they just totally just had the real sound, and they watered it up somehow.
Yes, exactly.
That's
exactly.
really good. That's
we tried
really
to
clever.
do that throughout. There was an opportunity. I always thought of like Polanski movies and how he does that too, where you kind of get this sense through the wall, and all that great stuff in Rosemary's Baby, where Mia Farrow can hear through the wall. And so we tried. I wanted to sort of borrow some of that kind of stuff too. And
Isn't that wonderful when she can hear hear little pieces of conversation?
Yes,
that's
yes.
great.
And you're just kind of like, what are you doing? And it was great because we would record stuff with Richard and with Chloe, and then I would say, so we have to find a way of doing this. And then Doug Murray and Will Files, who are the guys from Skywalker, they're like, oh, they did this thing, and I'm listening to them like going, oh, that's fantastic because I can't quite make it out. And so the sound. That's the thing. I felt this way in Cloverfield too. I think for this kind of movie, sound is critically important because it's all about atmosphere, and that charges. The movie I wanted to be filled with a kind of dread, a kind of creeping dread, and I think the reason for that is because I feel that what's brilliant about Lindquist's story is he's doing a vampire story that's really about the horror of adolescence, about being bullied. And so in a way, I want those horror scenes with the bullies to be just as horrific as Jenkins gutting people.
Sure.
But all of that is about dread. I want it to permeate. When he goes to school every day, that's what it feels like. He's waiting for the attack. He's waiting.
Yeah.
And I wanted the movie to be about waiting. It's much more about anticipation than it is about those moments actually occurring.
By the way, one tiny thing that I got into a dispute with somebody.
Yeah.
He said that the swimming pool, he was under the impression that it's happening sometime in the day, and that wouldn't be right because she couldn't go out in the day.
She couldn't go out in the day. No,
so it's definitely an evening scene.
That's the whole thing is that if you watch in the film, it's getting sort of later and later in the winter, and so it seems to be getting darker and darker in these after-school classes.
Right.
So when you see the establishing shot at the beginning in the pool, it's snowing, and it is definitely night.
Okay.
And it's because it's probably like 5:30, 6 o'clock, but it's in the darkest part of winter.
Right. I also, nothing to take away from the actress. I just think that one of the significant upticks is definitely Chloe.
Chloe's fantastic. Yeah,
she's
Chloe's amazing.
Significantly more arresting. Again, not to be dismissive of the Swedish actress.
I'm glad you feel that way. I mean, I loved Alina. I thought she was. I mean, that's one of the things that I remember coming away from the film and going, "Wow, that girl." I thought her face was amazing. I found her very haunting.
Right.
But I knew that the most important thing we could do in this film, and it was true of the first film, that relationship matters more than anything. And in finding Chloe, I was really, really lucky, really, really happy. And the same thing with Cody. I mean, I think he's remarkable. I mean, the idea of doing an adult story like this that's so complex emotionally, it's on two 12-year-old kids. You really need some exceptional kids, and they are.
Now, briefly, the only sequence that I don't remember at all from the first one, the original, is the Richard Jenkins in the back of the car, the gas station, the car rolling over.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much the only thing that's straight, utterly unduplicated, or are there many other things? Just help me out.
Like that.
Really?
I mean, I tried to take, like I said, there are different aspects of things that were in the book that actually weren't in the original film. I tried to draw some of that in, and then it was really about the things that created an American landscape. The whole opening 20, 30 minutes is completely different. I mean, it has some elements that are the same, but like
they're moving in and everything.
Well, no, but it starts before that with Richard Jenkins being brought to the hospital, and you meet Elias. And
of course. What am I talking about? I'm sorry. Yes, I realize that.
Yeah,
I know that. I'm sorry.
So none of that is in the movie, and then you don't really see the Oscar's character peeping on his neighbors and all that kind of stuff.
The lovemaking thing,
and all that stuff that's, again, sort of inspired by that kind of Hitchcockian, like, rear window, watching from his point of view.
Yeah.
So lots of details like that along the way, and stuff about, there was stuff in the book about how he struggled with his bladder, and he would wet himself, especially when he got nervous, and I wanted to make the scenes, like I said, of the bullying as humiliating and horrific as possible. And so I tried to draw on some of that, and just lots of details like that throughout that I tried to do. Obviously, there's a translated sequence where Elias Codius comes